Hundreds of thousands of people across the world tune in to explore.org to catch a glimpse of Audubon's various seabirds. Our viewers watch events from eggs hatching to pufflings fledging, like our 2025 live cam puffling did on Monday. Thanks for learning along with us, Burful. Now the question is, how do we translate observational skills learned by watching the cams into something tangible for our own backyard? I'm Quinn Burkhart, Science Communications Assistant for National Audubon Society Seabird Institute and Project Puffin. I've spent my summer in coastal Maine, watching all kinds of seabirds grow and change. I've also been immersed into the life of an advanced birder, living at headquarters across the way from Hog Island Audubon Camp. I've been curious, and I'm sure a lot of you have as well. What is birding, and how can one become a birder? Maggie Dewane has some answers. She's been to 7 continents, worked for the White House Council on Environmental Equality, and contributed to the Huffington Post climate series End of the Earth, just to name a few. Her work around the world is an obvious effort to better understand conservation efforts and the effects of conservation on real people. Today, she joins us as the Vice President of Birdability, an organization dedicated to helping people from all backgrounds learn to bird. It's time to take our cam skills to the next level. So, Maggie, welcome to the metaphorical Explore.org stage. Would you like to introduce yourself to us and talk about what you do for birdability?
Yes, thank you, Quinn. And thank you for having me today. I am one of the people you described who tune in to explore.org, and I usually encourage my coworkers to do so too, especially when work can get overwhelming and we all need a feel good break. I love having it on in the background too when I'm cleaning the house, because being out in nature is where I feel most alive and most at peace, most myself. And it feels like bringing a bit of nature inside with me. So to join everybody here today, it's really an honor and pretty exciting. So thank you all to say. So as you've mentioned, I've worked in a variety of places and capacities. I'm a former environmental journalist and I've worked for the government. Today, I am the communications director at Defenders of Wildlife, a national nonprofit protecting creatures and places, which is definitely a heavy lift these days. I also have the honor of working with the Seabird Institute, like you, home of the Puffin Cam, every summer with Hog Island Audubon Camp. I lead a 1 week session where we learn about seabirds of Maine. We get out onto seabird islands, we clean up habitat, go on hikes, and we paint decoy birds that are used in seabird conservation projects all over the world. Basically, we get to imagine what it's like to be field biologists for a week, and we get to give back to these amazing birds. I'm also on the board of directors at Birdability, which is what brings me here today. So I want to tell you a little bit about Birdability, for those who don't know, because it is a relatively young or new nonprofit. We formed just a few years ago, and we're dedicated to sharing the joys of birding with people who have access challenges and ensuring that birding locations and communities are accessible to everybody. And I joined this organization, yes, because I think it's an incredible mission, and because I'm the daughter to parents with disabilities, and they're the ones who instilled the love of birding in me at a very young age. And my father has mobility challenges, which have gotten worse over the decades, and inhibited his ability to go sightsee or walk certain trails anymore, which makes one of his favorite hobbies much more difficult. So I joined Birdability to ensure that people like him and my mom are represented and have the access to these great joys. And now, while explore.org is an absolute godsend to bringing people to nature and places that they might not ever experience otherwise, birding doesn't have to mean watching from a computer screen or walking along trails. It can mean pretty much anything. And that's what I'm here to talk about today. And I know we'll get more into it in just a little bit.
I love the ways that you've been able to connect so much of your life back to birding. It's funny because I've spent my whole summer being surrounded by people whose careers revolve around birding, and I am a relatively new birder, so I've learned a lot, but it's also been really surprising to learn so much more about it. So I have a number of questions, and I'm sure we'll have audience questions coming in as well. So let's move into the main part of our event. So you, as well as I do, know that lots of pretty wild things can happen when you're observing wildlife. You can have a lot of different emotions. You can witness a lot of really cool stuff happen when you're in the wilderness or you're out in nature. What are some of the more impactful experiences that you've had leading birding events?
So, taking campers to seabird colony islands with the Hog Island Audubon Camp is one of my highlights, is one of the highlights of my year every year. Our campers get to set foot on one of the current project islands for the Seabird Institute. And while we typically go late in the season, all of the puffins have left, most of the terns have already migrated. There are still storm petrels, maybe some gannets. Every once in a while, we get some late puffins or terns. And we go onto these islands to remove marine debris, invasive plants. We build bird blinds that the researchers then use in the spring. Um, and we get to be a part of this mission, ensuring that puffins and Arctic terns, roseate terns, laughing gulls, stern petrels, they all come home to a welcome home next spring. And if we're really, really lucky, our team of instructors who are researchers with the Seabird Institute, they will reach into a storm petrel burrow, which you just saw, a little fluffy storm petrel chick there on the screen. And they'll pull out a chick that we then weigh, measure, and band. And we return it to its burrow. And we get to share this with our campers. And you can see here on screen, these are our campers actually helping a Seabird Institute researcher to band a storm petrel chick. And this work is critical to tracking and monitoring their populations, and watching campers see this remarkable, impressive bird up close. It's honestly an honor to be a part of this once in a lifetime moment for so many people. Um, and I'll let you in on a little insider scoop about storm petrels. And that is, they are a very good smelling bird. And I'm sure a lot of people are like, what on earth? But really, it's because they live underground in these earthy burrows. And so when you pull them out, you give them a little sniff, and we give our campers that opportunity sometimes. And it is the silliest, but like most wholesome and joyful moment. You smell this bird and it smells so earthy, like it's this bird has been gardening all day or something. And so sharing that joy and excitement in the moment with campers, that to me is impact, and it's so joyful.
That's so funny. I got to live and do research on a seabird island back when the season was pretty new. I went to Seal Island National Wildlife Refuge, which we actually did our first live event of the season from that island. So some of you may remember when I was out there, and I had I guess a nest because I don't know if they burrow or if they're underground, but I had some of those birds under my tent platform that
Yeah.
I didn't know for about 2 days. And then I woke up in the middle of the night and went, what is happening underneath me? And I took my flashlight and went
Yep.
under and went, oh, yep. So I
They
am familiar with those guys.
they have been known to burrow under our tents and even under outhouses out on the seabird colony islands.
There's never a dull moment on those islands.
No, no.
One of my observations that I've had this summer as I've really learned what birding is and how we are connected to birds is realizing how interconnected birds in general are to the rest of the ecosystem. So, in the modern times, our researchers live on the islands and they have cell phones and Wi-Fi and laptops, but back in the day before they had all of that, they would still rely a lot on the birds to understand, what are the birds doing? What do they sound like? Because that can indicate to them if a storm is coming or if something else is happening. And I didn't really understand that until I was here. How has birding introduced you to other components of conservation and science?
Well, first of all, I think you're so spot on in that observing birds tells us so much about our planet broadly, but also our surroundings nearby. And this is an exciting entry point for folks on the listening along with us, um, because I think being aware of birds, for example, you see each migration season, noticing their patterns, their timing of migration, those types of things might be shifting, and that can make us more aware of the science behind conservation. Like our planet is changing at our hands, and so I think we have a responsibility to the life on this planet, the life that we share this planet with, to conserve and innovate when we can. So while not necessarily a direct response to your question, I think birding is a very natural entry point to learning about conservation and science because birds have been along with us for centuries and observing them tells us about our world.
Absolutely. That's been one of the most fulfilling parts of my role as doing, of course, digital communications, but I also interpret in our Project Puffin Visitor Center. So I'm constantly telling people about how we realized that our Atlantic puffins were gone and how we brought them back and what we've learned in the years that we've been restoring them. And it's always so cool to watch people's minds be blown and watch them become as interested as I am.
Mhm.
Excuse me, but then also learning about what other people have observed by watching them as well. So it's definitely a really fulfilling part of interacting with people and learning their own birding experiences.
I agree.
The lead up to my next question is I have a quick embarrassing story to tell about myself.
Oh, let's hear it.
Yeah, early on in the season, this is even before the researchers deployed to the islands. A group of us, maybe five or six of us, rode out to Hog Island, which is a pretty quick row away from where our Seabird Institute headquarters are. And we went out for a little night hike, and it was beautiful out. There was no wind, and we're walking back through the woods to get back to our rowboat, and this unusual bird call comes from the woods, and I'm not even sure I really registered that it was even a bird. I'm standing there like, oh, what was that? That was interesting. And the researchers are so excited. You know, they're exchanging all these glances and they're guessing what it might be and they're pulling their phones out to check what the app says. And I'm standing there thinking, oh my gosh, I'm so not on the same level as these people. I don't know what I'm doing here. I don't know, can I even have impact in this? And of course, in the months since then, I've spent lots of time being immersed in their research and learning who they are as people, but then also who these birds are. And so I've really come to appreciate what it means to belong into a community of birders. And so I'm curious what value you see in birding with others and some ways that you recommend people can find birding groups or communities near them.
So I think this is a really good question. But first I have to ask, did you ever find out what bird it was making that noise?
It was some sort of warbler. It was some sort of really obvious bird that these researchers got so excited because they were building those bird lists, and I'm sitting there thinking, ah, is it a cardinal? Like with my really like below average birding knowledge, it was hilarious.
Everybody has to start somewhere,
They
and
do.
I think that's where birding community comes into play here because we all could really use some community these days. Our digitized world, while so beneficial in so many ways, it's also isolated a lot of people. And I think birding creates grounded, appreciative, wholesome communities. At least that's been my experience. And a lot of my friends who are now birders, it's created for them community. And I don't consider myself an above average birder either. I still need lots of help identifying bird species. And every time I'm with somebody I consider a birding expert, they're happy to share their love and passion with me. And how often do we find communities that are so welcoming and inviting? I think it's great to find ourselves these pockets. And to find those communities here in the US, we have so many resources. Certainly, there are Audubon chapters all over the country, not just the state branded groups, but then locally within your town or region, they offer birding talks, walks, you name it. There are nature centers here. I live in Virginia, and the county has so many different nature centers throughout, and each one of them offers a birding walk once a month. And so I take advantage of those. Um, this summer, we also at Birdability, which I'm here tonight representing, we have a really exciting partnership with the National Park Service and Environment for the Americas. We have interns at 6 different national parks across the country, and they've been hosting inclusive birding gatherings, whether that's a walk and talk or a sit and talk. And just to quickly list off for folks in case any of our listeners are near these parks, we have interns at Golden Gate National Recreation Area, Rocky Mountain National Park, Indiana Dunes National Park, as well as the George Washington Memorial Parkway and the Salem Maritime National Historic Site. So we're really kind of all over the country. And um, last but certainly not least, birdability.org, we have a birdability map, which shows all of the different, not all of, but a lot of community aggregated, accessible birding walks or viewpoints. And this is a great place to go if you are just starting out because you might be a little nervous to try birding for the first time. And if you go to one of these sites, chances are you're going to meet other birders. And then it's an immediate icebreaker when you see somebody looking to the sky or looking in a bush and you say, "Hey, what do you see? What are you looking for?" And I find myself doing that just when I'm walking my dog often and I see somebody with binoculars and I'm like, "Did you see the pileated woodpecker down the road?" And it's an immediate connection point. So I think, that is definitely a resource people can utilize. Um, and since we're here together through a virtual presentation, explore.org, thank you. I'm happy to share that Birdability also does something similar. We have the celebratory week each year. It's called Birdability Week. This year it is October 20th to 26th. And we host a lot of community gatherings. And last year, the annual week, it just filled my cup so much. I can't tell you. Like it was really wonderful. And we have a nationwide network of volunteers that we call them Birdability captains, and they are always hosting events. So you talk about community and how to find it. As long as you have an open mind, you will find the different resources. And I think Birdability is a great starting point, or like I said, your local nature centers or Audubon chapters.
That's so good to know. Yeah, it's even in the state of Maine, there are lots of different birding groups. There's Maine Audubon and then I think Mid-Coast Maine
Hmm.
Audubon. But
Yeah.
then even alongside that, there are so many local birding groups that are local even to just the really tiny towns in Maine. So that's been another really awesome thing about living here for the summer is understanding how many people are just building human connection through birding and going beyond just the natural connection to birding. It's so amazing to see that and witness the relationships that people make through that. So you have been birding pretty much all over the world, I think it's safe to say, and your career has taken you doing media for lots of different organizations and so many good connections. I'm curious what some misconceptions about birding and accessible birding that you've witnessed during this excellent career of yours.
Yeah, thank you, Quinn. But I think a big misconception about birding in general is that you have to know what you're looking at. You have to know what bird species are to be a birder, or that you have to have binoculars or bird feeder or guidebook. And that is not true at all. Do you have an appreciation of birds? Do you like to watch them? Then you are a birder. And this is something I have to remind myself of often, because like I said, I don't consider myself an above average birder, but I'm constantly watching them and I get to learn their behaviors and I find them remarkable and I find them to be teachers. So birding occurs in all kinds of ways, whether you're looking or listening, whether you're moving down a trail or sitting under a pavilion. You could be sitting indoors from a vehicle or behind a computer screen or just looking out your kitchen window. You might have an in-depth knowledge of bird identification or limited knowledge. You could be out on your own or you could be with others. So there is no wrong way to go birding. To answer the second half of your question, accessible birding, when most people think of something being accessible, the first thought might go to envisioning someone with a visible disability, somebody perhaps like my dad who uses a wheelchair to get around, or someone walking with a cane that indicates they're either blind or have limited sight. What the majority of people might not think is that accessible birding also applies to people who are deaf or hard of hearing, people who are neurodivergent, have chronic illnesses, intellectual or developmental disabilities, or other health concerns. Accessibility reaches many, many millions of people. And I know that explore.org has a lot of international audiences who tune in, but maybe just to give an example with some numbers here in the US, 1 in 4 Americans have a disability. So making birding accessible means reaching 25% of the population. But I will say that doesn't mean a person has to have a disability to benefit from accessible birding. So while yes, accessible birding can mean paved trails that motorized scooters and wheelchairs can easily traverse and that blind or low vision people can more easily navigate. And yes, it can mean moving slowly so that there's time to absorb and process all of the stimulation happening around you if you're neurodivergent. Accessibility also means watching birds outside of your window because that's all you might have the energy or time or physical mobility to do. It can mean driving somewhere or watching birds from your car. It can be sitting on a park bench and observing the birds just around you, listening to the birds around you. Um, I used to live in Washington, D.C. and New York City before that. And there are peregrine falcons in DC, and the birding in Central Park was pretty fantastic. I've seen woodcocks and thrushes and juncos there. And living in an apartment building doesn't mean there aren't birds around. Um, pigeons are everywhere. And I just recently got a copy of this book. It's called Pigeon Watching by Rosemary Moscow. And you can learn all about this bird who is considered a pest and a nuisance, and you will learn to love them, I promise you. But anyway, I give these examples of these urban examples to illustrate that you don't have to go far, you don't have to seek out exotic locales to only see unique birds. Birding can be done anywhere, as can accessible birding. And um, accessible birding is just so wonderful and important because observing or enjoying birds in their natural habitats, I think, offers more than just the opportunity to connect with nature. Like it provides significant mental and cognitive health benefits. Um, at the sake of being long-winded here, I get so passionate about this. And
Yeah.
these benefits, birding reduces stress and anxiety for your mental health. It enhances memory and focus for your cognitive well-being, and it creates social connection and community building, as we talked about. Birding has also proven therapeutic as a tool for trauma recovery. And why and how, for new birders, this might seem really esoteric perhaps, but um, it's because birding is a mindful practice and it's the easiest entry point any of us have to nature because birds are found everywhere, all continents, all habitats and landscapes, whether you're a city dweller or you live so remotely, like you can find birds. And I mention entry point to nature. I want to sit on that for a minute because while cities are impressive creations of human design, they're not where we all originated from. We came from nature. Our roots, our history are in nature, and birds have been alongside us the entire journey. They're they're our connection to our own evolution, and they've adapted as we've grown.
That was beautiful. I thoroughly enjoyed that. So thank you for that good answer. I loved it. And it is so true, I think, just almost being able to feel the benefits of birding while you're doing it. I am incredibly fortunate this summer that on top of what my actual job is, where I'm living is right on the Gulf of Maine. So I come home from work and the ocean is literally 200 yards from where I'm sitting. So I get out of my car, I can go inside the house and grab a life jacket or binoculars and just go outside and be right by the ocean. And that's been a dream I didn't know, but a dream that came true. A dream that I didn't know I had that now I've made possible. So it's so true, I think, that everything you just said is so accurate. And I think part of how we find the community within birding is
Yeah.
sharing all of that with each other. I do want to talk a little bit about some of the technology that has now become something that is changing the game a little bit for birders. In the same way that just the smartphone in general has really changed how we live our lives, there are so many apps out there now that have really changed the game of how young birders, older birders, people of all backgrounds have really learned to connect with nature. Can you offer your own perspective on using technology like smartphone apps to connect to nature and other things that you think might be beneficial to have or things that can prepare you for birding successfully?
Yeah, and certainly up on the screen, we just saw binoculars, which are like the first thing that people think of. But I'll start with technology because you mentioned that. Um, we have a lot of resources over at birdability.org. We have guidance documents, tips, and the birdability map that I mentioned earlier that lay out proven practices for accessible birding. Um, for beginning birders, I'd certainly recommend the Merlin app, which, is this really incredible um, app that you can take with you on your smartphone and you can use it for sight or sound. And if you don't have a smartphone, that's fine. You can always carry a field guide. Sibley's or Peterson's are great. Um, Binoculars are great. I usually try to remember to carry those. I don't do a great job of it, so they're not necessary. But I also have, my field camera when I'm out exploring, and that kind of works similarly to binoculars. Um, those all are pretty basic items. You don't need much. I'd say you don't even need those, which I just mentioned. I like to watch birds out of my window during the workday. Nothing is needed to go birding. These are just things to enhance the experience. Um, if I want to explore new territory, for example, of course, I pack, snacks and water and comfortable walking shoes. I do research ahead of time. All of the things that you would do ahead of setting out for any kind of nature walk or hike, just to set yourself up for safety and success. So I think you can start anywhere.
That's such a good mantra to have of it too, is starting anywhere. I think in a similar fashion to my approach to being creative, writing or doing art, I think I always have this notion that whatever I do, it has to come out looking exactly like I want it to, and I should know everything about it. But that's not true, and it's also the beauty of nature is you never know what you're gonna see when you go outside.
Mhm.
You're never going to think about how it could affect you, how could it affect your life. So it's always a new adventure to get outside and just see what's out there in general. Are there
Nature is
things?
not, I will say nature is not perfect. So
Yeah.
you birding outside does not have to be perfect. And
Hmm.
you just touched on something that really struck a chord with me. So that's why I just wanted to add, like,
Good.
there is no right or wrong way to do it. And I think birding, while so inclusive, it also comes with sometimes a stigma of I have to do it right. I have to have the binoculars, the best ones. And I have hand-me-down binoculars. Like and they work just perfect. So uh, they're just fine. You don't have to have everything to be a birder.
Absolutely. That's a good segue into the next question I had for you. Are there things that you've learned about yourself or the world through birding that you may not have figured out if you weren't interested in birding?
I think that the more I learn about certain birds, the more I see bits of myself in them, or maybe them in me. Like I think of a couple species that come to mind. I think of the raven's intelligence and curiosity, which I just respect. They're fun to talk to. They recognize faces. They're playful and they carry an air of wisdom with them. And then another bird that comes to mind is I resonate so deeply with the wandering albatross's stout character. 5 years they can go without touching land. And what seems daunting to us, this endless ocean with no landmarks to navigate, it's freedom to them. It's sensing and experiencing the world with more than just eyes. I think that's incredible. And then I laugh at the sage grouse's whimsy. Like these birds are so silly. And sure, it's a mating display as only birds do. It's flamboyant and absolutely fantastic. But surely there's got to be some humor in there. And then the last bird that comes to mind is the lilac-breasted roller. I really admire their fearlessness. They are known to skirt the edges of wildfire along the brush to catch fleeing insects, like just to get a meal. They flirt with danger. So I've learned a lot about the qualities I value through the qualities and character traits of birds.
Honestly, that's pretty relatable because I knew about the story of Project Puffin before I came here, but I learned a lot about just what I want to put out in the world based on what I learned about the puffins. They are so resilient. They're known for being birds who are slow to adapt to change, but they are, again, they're resilient. They have made such significant progress over the course of our restoration program, and that really reminded me of these are the things that I want to carry through
Yeah,
my own life, you know? So I completely see where you're coming from. I do want to touch on this audience question that we got real quick, and then
sure.
we can return to our conversation. So this person is asking, do either of you think that the amount of birders is increasing? And also, do you think the age of people who start birding is getting younger? I'll let you take it first, since you probably know a little more than I do.
I think absolutely the amount of birders is increasing. Like I am more often, even in my own neighborhood, seeing people out with binoculars or just walking trails, holding their smartphone like this to try to capture bird song and figure out who's in the woods. Um, and I think that's a great basic barometer of, yeah, I think more people are seeing that birding does create this community. And I'm also hearing from new friends, old friends that during the COVID pandemic, it was what can I do to create as a new hobby to find digital community when we're all at home? And birding was that moment for a lot of people. So I think we are definitely seeing more birders, and I feel like people are starting at a younger age, and part of that has to do with digitized society because it's young people are able to access what we might have had in a field guide. They're able to access that times a million via the internet, and that's a good thing. I think the more people that we have who care about birds, care about their habitats, then that means the more people we have kind of fighting the good fight to protect these wild places and the birds that we share the planet with.
I think I would agree with you too. For from two more visual aspects, I think one is that the area that the Seabird Institute has in Maine is a protected wildlife sanctuary. It's the Todd Wildlife Sanctuary. We have a few trails that go through our woods and a pond and a meadow, really well maintained trails. So if you are someone who lives close-ish to the coast of Maine, it's worth checking out. But I'm sitting on our porch almost all the time when I'm at base because it's such a nice porch with a good view. But I'm often seeing people who live in the neighborhood but who are also walking down from the main road coming through the area with binoculars or with a field guide. We have other interpretive displays that people can look at as well. So I see more people, I think, than I anticipated, just roaming around the land, checking things out. And I also, again, I work in our visitor center, and one of the biggest questions that I get asked is how people can get involved, how people can break into birding. We do have volunteer options through Project Puffin, so if you're interested, you can go to the Seabird Institute website. You can go out and volunteer on one of our seabird islands for 2 weeks or however long you want to. So we get a lot of questions about how to become a birder, like what we're talking about here. So I definitely would agree that I do think it's increasing, probably due a little bit in part to technology and wanting to get out in the
Yeah.
world a little bit more, but then also just being more aware too of conservation efforts and watching birds do their thing. And this goes a little bit into another question that I had for you, Maggie, that what if you had to give your best advice to a beginning birder who was really freaked out by the notion of becoming a birder or going out into the woods, what would you say to them?
Everybody was at first an amateur.
Hmm.
Everybody had to start somewhere, and getting started is sometimes the scariest part. It's the biggest step, but then once you do it, it's easy from there. Um, but I would say, if you don't know where or how to start, and it's not so much the need of like, well, I'm scared to do it, but I just don't know how to do it. Um, Pick a park or a nature trail that you're comfortable or familiar with, and walk along or sit and listen or look for as many birds as you can see. Just start to observe. And as I mentioned earlier, be mindful of what you are experiencing. And I like to try to identify all the different bird songs that I'm hearing. I think that's a really fun way because for me, like I said, I often forget my binoculars at home when I'm out in the woods. And so I can't see who's way up in the trees, but I can hear them. So I try to listen and count how many different songs I hear. And to me, it's like, okay, so I'm here with at least 6 or 7 bird species right now. How wonderful that I'm sharing this space with them. And yeah, to me that's part of the fun of it is observe, and getting started is just pick a place that feels comfortable to you, and have at it, because like we said earlier, there's no wrong way to do it, and you just have to get started somewhere.
I love that, and I think it's also very true to just absorb what is happening to you and kind of let birding happen to you as well. I experience that a lot when I'm in the woods, which has always been one of my favorite places to be. I grew up with some woods in my backyard, and that's always been one of the ways that I also find myself kind of like what you said at the very beginning, just feeling really relaxed and at peace because
Yeah.
you are in a place that you love, and the longer that you stand there and are just observing what's going on around you, the more you realize that you're not actually alone, that there's birds out there,
Oh
there's
yeah.
insects, there are potentially other fun little critters out in the woods that you may or may not want to meet. But it really, I think, helps drive home that it's a big ecosystem and you're just part of it, and it gives you a lot of room to explore what you're experiencing.
Hmm. I
I
agree.
have one more question that I want to ask, and then we can start wrapping up. I don't see any more audience questions coming in. So, another thing that I have done throughout my freelance career is do social media for an organization that gives support to people with severe mental health or mental intellectual disabilities to help them lead a more independent life. And so to me, there's been a lot of changes in dialogue over the last 15, 20 years about how we deal with disability and deal with accessible, just in the workplace, in medicine, in the outdoors. The conversations about how we approach accessibility, I think, are changing. I'm curious what you think the future of accessible birding looks like and where you think that we could go and how people who watch our cams could help drive that movement.
Yeah, I am very glad that conversations around accessibility have grown and expanded, because the Americans with Disabilities Act was passed in the early 90s to try to create more equal opportunity and access. Um, but we still aren't seeing an even playing field. And I think this movement of awareness is such a great thing, because as I mentioned at the top, I'm a daughter of parents with disabilities, and seeing how the world is not made for everybody, it can be really discouraging. And I am just so hopeful and driven to help create a world that welcomes everyone because this world takes all kinds and everybody is valued and important. And we had a photo up earlier that said you belong here, and everybody should feel that, especially in the outdoors, especially when birding. And so, what does the future of birding look like, or accessible birding? I mean, how great would it be if we just had more accessible trails? I think of places like Yellowstone National Park, which have these really awesome boardwalks that go along really idyllic scenes or spots, and they are done in a way that doesn't disturb nature, but they allow everybody to traverse these iconic wild landscapes. So if we could see more of that, so that more people with limited mobility or access can get outside, I think that would be wonderful. I am sure that there will be more apps and more technology and birdability on our part. We are really hoping to elevate that birdability map and turn it into an app that people can access, because having at your fingertips something that is much more user friendly and shows you where the nearest accessible trail is for birding, like that brings the outdoors to your hand, to your palm. So I am hopeful that we can keep doing that. That's why I think it's such a great mission, is that we are trying to innovate into a future that is what we imagine as inclusive.
That was an amazing answer. It's funny to me in adulthood because my grandfather, who passed when I was preteen-ish, I was 10 when he died, was in a wheelchair due to health reasons, and he went wheelchair bound when I was an infant. The spring before I was born is when he started living his life in a wheelchair. And when I was a kid, because he lived with me and my grandparents live on the same property as my parents, I spent almost all my time, pretty much every day of my life with this person who was in a wheelchair. And there were clearly things that he couldn't do, but to me, it expanded my world so much because I was
Yeah.
constantly witnessing this person who needed ramps, needed a van, needed an elevator, needed a special wheelchair that helped him navigate his world. So I grew up with that, and then as I entered my adulthood, I slowly started to realize, oh, this isn't really how the whole world works, but there are ways that we can accommodate and we can make our world bigger and help more people have equal life experiences and get to live the way that they want to, and that absolutely extends to nature. And I have definitely seen over the last couple of years more and more trails become accessible and tools that people can use that attach to canes or to wheelchairs or give them, has braille on it. Or I've seen so many improvements in my adulthood as I've also been having that realization of ways that we can support each other. So all that is to say that I am so glad that you were willing to come on and chat about birdability. You guys do such important work that hits home for me, but I know it hits home for a lot of other people. So, to start wrapping up a little bit, thank you so much, Maggie, for being here. This was really informative, and I hope that our viewers got a lot out of it, especially as our season starts to wind down a little bit. The Puffins are only here for 3 months, but birding is all year. So, take what you've learned tonight, take it to your backyard or your kitchen window, wherever it is that you feel at home that you can connect to nature. We would love to have some of you in our comments sharing what you've learned, anything that is of interest to you. We love to see it coming. So, thank you, Maggie, so much for being here, for the work you do in general, but especially with Birdability. We all appreciate it. And thank you to explore.org as always, who handles the back end production of this and keeps me from falling flat on my face. I so dearly appreciate that. Thank you to Seabird Institute for letting me decide what I want these events to look like and run wild with them. And lastly, a huge thank you to all of our viewers who always support us through our live cams, come to our visitor center, go out to our islands and volunteer. we can't do what we do and bring these seabirds to Maine every year without your help. So it's all thanks to you guys for tuning in and supporting us. So the puffling may have fledged earlier this week, but we have a lot more coming down the pipeline through the last few weeks of the season here. So stay in touch. Feel free to follow along on our social media with our newsletter, Seabirds and Shorelines, or with explore.org, or with our in-person Puffin Project Visitor Center events. And also check out Birdability, of course. We will throw the links to all of these in the event description so that you can access them later. So, with that being said, thank you for tuning in and have a
Thank
good night, and
you.
we'll see you next time.